All right, so are you ready for this? We're going to take a deep dive into something pretty intense, pretty complicated. We're talking about the wildfires, the ones just tearing through California. Thousands of firefighters are out there, battling these huge blazes. And here's the thing, over 900 of those firefighters, well, they're inmates.
Yeah, it's a system with a long history for sure, a lot of twists and turns.
So today we're going to go deep, really deep into this whole world of inmate firefighting.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack the history, like all the way back, talk
Yep.
about the ethics, the dilemmas, and we're even going to look at some potential solutions.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think a lot of people are surprised when they learn that California has been using inmate firefighters for, well, a really long time, like since 1915.
1915, seriously,
Yeah.
that's over a century. So we're not talking about some like recent experiment, right?
Yeah.
This is like deeply rooted in how things are done.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, today there are 35 fire camps, like all across the state,
Mm.
and inmates. They volunteer for the program.
Volunteer, huh? But that's kind of tricky, right? When you think about what it's actually like in prison. I mean, how much choice do they really have?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, labor's often mandatory, right?
Right. It's not like they're signing up for a cushy desk job. We're talking about incredibly dangerous work here, right? Like on the front lines of these massive wildfires.
Exactly. Yeah. And for a lot less money than professional firefighters, we're talking wages between $5.80 and $10.24 a day.
So they're out there risking their lives, like sometimes right alongside those professional crews, but making what, less than $10 a day? Something about that just seems,
Off.
yeah, off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It raises a lot of questions. And it's not just the pay. There was an investigation back in 2018 by Time magazine, and they found that inmate firefighters, they face a way higher risk of getting seriously hurt compared to, the professional firefighters. Like way higher.
Hold on, wait. Higher risk of injury. Why is that? Is it like, are they not getting the same training? Is the equipment not as good?
That's definitely part of it. They do get some training, yeah, but it's often not as well as thorough as what professional firefighters go through. They might not have access to the same gear either, or medical support out in the field. And then there's the old power dynamic. You can't forget about that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Inmates,
Yeah.
they might feel pressured to do things that are more risky or work longer, even if they're exhausted or even injured.
Okay, so you've got this like power imbalance, maybe not enough training or resources, and then you add in the super low wages. I mean, it's starting to sound less like a voluntary program and more like, I don't know.
A system that's taking advantage.
Yeah, of a really vulnerable population.
A lot of the program, they talk about rehabilitation. They say it provides, structure, teaches them skills, a sense of discipline, teamwork.
Okay, yeah, I can see how those would be good outcomes. But we also can't ignore those concerns about exploitation, about the whole issue of consent. What are I don't know, the strongest arguments from the people who criticize this system?
Well, they say the low wages, the higher risk of injuries, the whole question of whether it's really voluntary, it all adds up to exploitation.
Yeah.
And they also point back to, what we were talking about before, that loophole in the 13th Amendment. They see that as the foundation of the whole problem.
So it sounds like there's a lot more to explore here. Compelling arguments on both sides. It's not a simple issue, that's for sure. But for everyone listening, stick with us. We're going to dig deeper into the pros and cons. We'll look at some of the solutions people have proposed, and hopefully we'll all come away with a better understanding of this complex and controversial system. So we're talking about some pretty strong opinions on both sides of this inmate firefighting thing. But let's break it down a bit more, get into the details. You mentioned that the supporters of this program, they talk about like the potential for rehabilitation. What does that actually look like day to day?
Okay, so think of it this way. They're not just, putting out fires. They're learning a trade, an actual skill. You're getting trained in, like, wildland fire suppression, using all this heavy equipment, chainsaws, even basic first aid and CPR.
Yeah.
These are skills that could, turn into real jobs when they get out.
So it's not just doing time, it's like building a future.
Right. Yeah.
Yep.
And it's not just the technical skills. You're also learning discipline, how to be part of a team, all that. Employers, they look for those things. It can make a big difference for someone who's trying to, get back on their feet.
Yeah, especially if you've made some mistakes, right? You're looking for a second chance.
Absolutely. And I mean, there are tons of stories out there, guys who were inmate firefighters and, they turn their lives around. They give the program all the credit. Some even become professional firefighters.
Wow, that's really something. It sounds like it can be a real turning point for some people. But let's be real for a second. We've got to talk about the wages, the pay. It's so low. How can anyone justify paying people less than $10 a day for this kind of work. It's dangerous.
That's where things get, well, heated. A lot of critics just flat out call it exploitation. I mean, you've got professional firefighters working right next to these inmate crews, making way more for doing the same job.
Yeah, it's hard to ignore that.
It is.
It makes it seem like the state's just profiting off of them, especially with how much money California saves by using inmate firefighters instead of hiring more professionals.
Yeah, for sure. And you remember that time investigation we talked about? Not only are they paid less, but they're also way more likely to get hurt on the job.
Yeah, you mentioned all that, like heat stroke and burns, even broken bones. Are there any specific stories from that report that really, I don't know, stuck with you?
Yeah, there was this one case, this guy got really messed up when a bulldozer blade, malfunctioned, crushed his leg.
Oh, God.
He ended up with, permanent disabilities, chronic pain, but he got almost nothing for it. No compensation, barely any medical care.
That's just awful. It really shows you how vulnerable these guys are and
Yeah.
that there's just not enough to protect them.
Another one that really got to me was there was this inmate crew. They were sent into this really bad fire, super dangerous, but they didn't have proper supervision. No one was really communicating with them. A bunch of them got burned, bad smoke inhalation. One of them, he didn't make it.
God, these stories are just, not hard to hear, but it's important, right? It makes it real, shows you the risks,
Right? It's
the
a
consequences.
huge change.
So we're stuck in this web of what's the right thing to do, what's affordable, and what's even possible. But are there any solutions out there, any middle ground, any compromises people are talking about?
Yeah, actually, there are some pretty cool ideas out there. And people are starting to realize that just, doing things the same way, it's not going to work anymore.
Well, that's a good sign, right? So what are some of these ideas? What kind of changes are people proposing?
One that has a lot of promise is this idea of like helping inmate firefighters get real firefighting jobs when they get out,
Mm.
making it easier for them to transition.
How would that work?
So imagine if they could get certifications while they're incarcerated,
Huh.
and those would be recognized by the professional agencies, like legit qualifications. No more hitting a wall just because you have a record.
So they're actually building a future for themselves, not just putting in time.
Right. It gives everyone a reason to focus on, on doing things the right way, making sure these guys have a chance.
Are there any states that are doing this well? Like examples of success?
Yeah, Colorado's been ahead of the curve on this. They've got a program, inmate firefighters can earn certifications, and those are directly transferable to professional jobs when they get out. And they've seen a lot of guys successfully making that switch.
That's great to hear. Shows it can actually work. But we can't forget the bigger picture, right? How do we manage all these fires? You talked about technology, how that might change things, reduce our reliance on firefighters, both inmate and professional. It sounds kind of futuristic and a little scary.
It is cutting edge stuff. And yeah, anytime you've got new technology, you've got to think about the implications.
Hmm.
But think of what we could do. Drones, for example. Put an infrared camera on one of those.
Mm-hmm.
You get real-time data on the fire, where it's going, how it's behaving. That helps the crews on the ground make smarter decisions.
So less sending people in blind, more like using data to be strategic.
Right. It's about safety, efficiency for
Yeah.
everyone. And some of the stuff they're coming up with is even crazier. Think about AI. Imagine AI tools that can analyze all this data and help with everything from deciding where to send resources to planning evacuations.
That's wild, like something out of a movie. But also really cool. But technology can't solve everything, right? Well, what about the pay issue? Making sure these guys are getting compensated fairly.
More and more people are talking about that. They're saying inmate firefighters should be paid the same as the professionals since they're doing the same job, facing the same risks. And honestly, it's hard to disagree. Equal pay for equal work.
Seems fair. No more two different systems, where some lives are worth more than others just because of their legal status. But there's also the whole question of working conditions. What about making sure they're treated right, that it's safe, humane?
Yeah, there are definitely groups pushing for that. They want stricter safety rules, better access to doctors, and ways for these guys to report abuse or exploitation, if something's not right.
It sounds like there's a lot of energy going into actually changing this system. But let's zoom out for a second. We're talking about reforming the inmate firefighting program. But what about preventing these massive fires in the first place? Are we just playing catch up if we're only focused on putting them out?
You're right on the money there. We've got to get ahead of this. And that means tackling climate change because it's making everything drier, the fire seasons longer.
Hmm.
We also need better ways of managing our forests, doing controlled burns, thinning out the trees, so there's less fuel for the fires.
So it's not just fighting fires, it's creating a landscape that's like more resistant to fire. But there's also the whole issue of working conditions. What about making sure that they're treated fairly, humanely, that it's safe?
Absolutely. There's a lot of energy going into pushing for those kinds of reforms.
Yeah.
Like stricter safety protocols, better access to medical care, and really importantly, clear ways for them to report abuse or exploitation, if something's not right.
So it sounds like there's a lot happening, a lot of people working to make this system better, make it fairer. But okay, let's zoom out even further. We're talking about reforming the inmate firefighting program, but shouldn't we also be thinking about preventing these massive fires in the first place? I mean, are we just playing catch up if we're only focused on putting them out?
That's a really important point. You can't just fight fires forever. You got to get ahead of the problem. And that means tackling climate change because that's a big part of what's driving these bigger, more intense fires. It's making everything drier, it's extending the fire season, and we also need to be smarter about how we manage our forests, doing things like controlled burns, thinning out the underbrush so there's less fuel for the fires to burn.
It's about creating a landscape that's more resilient, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a huge undertaking. It involves scientists, policymakers, communities, everyone working together.
Well, this has been a real journey. We've gone from the history of this whole inmate firefighting system to the ethical debates to these incredible solutions that people are coming up with. And I have to say, it feels like we've only just scratched the surface. But one thing's for sure, this is an issue that has a lot of layers, a lot of implications.
Absolutely. We've just touched on a few pieces of the puzzle today.
Sure, yeah.
There are so many different perspectives, stories, solutions out there. It's a complex issue.
So to everyone listening, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep learning, do your own research, challenge your own assumptions, talk about this with people, because ultimately what happens with inmate firefighting, and honestly what happens to our planet, it depends on all of us being engaged, on us finding solutions that are both just and sustainable.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity, given you some things to think about.
Yeah, keep asking questions, keep challenging the status quo, and most importantly, keep making a difference.